Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we share stories that uplift the spirit and challenge the status quo. Today's tale is one of courage, accountability, and the fight for dignity in the face of prejudice. When a young black man, simply shooting hoops in his driveway, becomes the target of racial bias from his neighbor, a shocking confrontation ensues. What follows is a moment that will change this community forever, revealing truths about bias and the power of standing together for what's right. Stick with us as we explore an inspiring journey filled with unexpected turns, deep reflection, and a message of hope that will resonate long after the story ends. If you love compelling stories about resilience and justice, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting warm hues across the quiet suburban neighborhood. A light breeze rustled through the leaves of the towering oaks lining the streets. Elijah James dribbled his basketball with rhythmic precision in the driveway of his family's cozy two-story home. The sound echoed in the still evening air, blending with the upbeat hip-hop beats pumping from the portable speaker perched on the porch railing. Elijah's mother, Monica, sat comfortably in a wicker chair on the porch, her favorite book in hand. She occasionally glanced up, smiling as she watched her son hone his skills. Basketball had always been Elijah's passion, and these evening sessions were as much about relaxation as they were about practice. Across the street, hidden behind lace curtains, Margaret Peggy Simmons narrowed her eyes, muttering under her breath. Peggy's pristine lawn and meticulously trimmed hedges reflected her obsessive need for control, and she saw Elijah's activity as a disruption to the neighborhood's order. Disturbing the peace, she grumbled, to no one in particular, her sharp nails drumming against the windowsill. They think they can do whatever they want around here. The music grew louder as Elijah's favorite track came on. Peggy's patience snapped. She stormed outside, clutching her cardigan tightly around her. Her presence immediately caught Monica's eye, and she stiffened in her seat. "Elijah," Peggy barked, her voice shrill and cutting through the music like a knife. Elijah paused mid-dribble, turning to face her. His expression was calm, though the faintest flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am," he replied politely, resting the basketball under his arm. "Turn that racket down. And what are you doing here anyway? This isn't your property." Elijah furrowed his brows, glancing at his surroundings. "I'm in my driveway, ma'am." Peggy crossed her arms, her lips pursed tightly. "Don't get smart with me. This is a respectable neighborhood, not some playground." Monica stood from her chair, her voice measured yet firm. "Mrs. Simmons, Elijah has every right to play basketball in his driveway. He's not bothering anyone." Peggy shot Monica a glare. "That's your opinion. Some of us prefer peace and quiet." Elijah sighed, picking up his ball. "Look, I'll turn the music down, no problem." But Peggy wasn't satisfied. She turned on her heel and marched back inside, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Minutes later, the distant sound of sirens reached their ears. Elijah glanced at his mother, concern flickering in his dark eyes. Monica's jaw tightened. "Stay calm, Elijah," she said, though her voice betrayed her unease. Two patrol cars pulled up to the curb. The officers stepped out, their expressions stern and unreadable. Peggy appeared on her porch, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. Elijah stood frozen, his basketball resting against his hip. His mother descended the steps, her protective instincts kicking in as she positioned herself near her son. "Can I help you, officers?" Monica asked, her tone steady but edged with steel. One of the officers adjusted his belt, his gaze shifting between Elijah and Monica. "We received a report of a disturbance and possible trespassing." Elijah took a deep breath, steadying himself. "This is my house," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I live here." Peggy chimed in from her porch. "He's lying. He doesn't belong here. I saw him wandering around earlier looking suspicious." The officers exchanged glances before stepping closer to Elijah. "Do you have any ID, son?" one asked, his tone authoritative. Monica stepped forward, her voice rising. "He's a child. He doesn't need to carry ID to play in his own driveway." The tension thickened as the officers stood their ground. Elijah remained calm, his mother standing firmly by his side, but Peggy's accusations hung heavily in the air. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the standoff. A sleek black SUV pulled up, the driver's door opening to reveal Chief Darnell James, his polished uniform catching the last rays of sunlight. He stepped out with an air of authority, his sharp gaze sweeping the scene. The tension in the air shifted palpably as Chief James strode toward the small crowd. His 6-foot frame, broad shoulders, and commanding presence silenced the murmurs from the gathering onlookers. Peggy's smug expression faltered, replaced by confusion as she recognized him. "Chief James," one of the officers greeted nervously, straightening up. Darnell didn't immediately respond, his focus locked on Elijah. His son's composed yet wary stance told him everything he needed to know. He turned to the officers, his voice low but sharp. "What's going on here?" Before they could answer, Peggy interjected, pointing an accusatory finger at Elijah. "He's been causing trouble, Chief. Playing loud music, trespassing. Who knows what else? I called because I feared for our safety." Darnell's gaze shifted to Peggy, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Simmons," he said evenly, "this young man isn't trespassing." Peggy blinked, flustered. "How do you know that?" "Because," Darnell said, his voice hardening, "he's my son." The weight of his words hung in the air. The officers froze, their eyes widening in realization. Peggy's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Your son?" she stammered. I didn't know." Darnell didn't give her time to recover. He turned to the officers. "Did you confirm the report before approaching?" One officer shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Simmons was adamant about her concerns, sir. We didn't think it was necessary." Darnell's jaw tightened. "So you acted on her word alone, without verifying facts?" The officers looked down, avoiding his piercing gaze. Monica stepped forward, her voice sharp. "They demanded ID from my son, as if he were a criminal, all because of her baseless accusations." The gathering crowd murmured in agreement, phones still raised to capture the unfolding drama. Peggy shrank under the weight of their stares, her earlier confidence evaporating. Elijah finally spoke, his voice steady. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just playing basketball." Darnell placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder before addressing the crowd. "What you've witnessed here isn't just about my family. It's about accountability and fairness. Actions like this erode trust in our community." Peggy tried to slink back into her house, but Darnell's voice stopped her cold. "Mrs. Simmons," he said, his tone cutting through the murmurs, "we're not done here." She turned slowly, her face red with embarrassment. Darnell gestured toward one of the officers. "I want a full report filed on this incident, and I'll be reviewing it personally. Understood?" "Yes, sir," the officer replied quickly. As the black SUV drove away with Darnell, Elijah, and Monica inside, the crowd dispersed, their murmurs echoing down the street. Peggy remained on her porch, her mind racing as she realized the consequences of her actions were far from over. The following morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word of the previous evening's events had spread like wildfire, and a small crowd had gathered near the James family home. Peggy's porch remained empty, her curtains drawn tightly shut. Chief Darnell James parked his SUV in front of the patrol cars still stationed outside the house. With deliberate steps, he approached the officers, his sharp gaze scanning their faces. "Officers," he began, his tone authoritative but measured, "I'd like a full account of the events that transpired here yesterday." The younger officer, clearly uncomfortable, shifted on his feet. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. The caller claimed there was a trespasser who appeared to be engaging in suspicious activity." Darnell nodded, his expression unreadable. "And did you confirm this information before engaging with my son?" The older officer, his face taut with regret, cleared his throat. "No, Chief. We took the report at face value and acted accordingly." Darnell tilted his head, his voice dropping into a dangerous calm. "Let me be clear. When you wear this badge, you are sworn to serve and protect, not to jump to conclusions based on unverified information. You've embarrassed yourselves, this department, and this community." The officers nodded, chastised but silent. Turning on his heel, Darnell faced Peggy, who had reluctantly stepped out onto her porch, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Peggy," he said, raising an eyebrow, "I believe you know my son, Elijah." The crowd, now numbering in the dozens, erupted in murmurs. Phones were raised, cameras recording the unfolding drama. Peggy's face flushed crimson, her jaw working silently as she struggled to find a response. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "Didn't know?" Darnell repeated, his tone incredulous. "You've lived across the street from us for 3 years, Peggy. 3 years. But instead of walking over to have a conversation, you chose to escalate the situation by calling the police." Peggy's eyes darted toward the onlookers, many of whom were recording her every move. "I thought he was someone else," she muttered, her voice defensive. "Thought he was someone else?" Darnell's voice grew sharper. "Or assumed he didn't belong here because of the color of his skin?" The crowd gasped, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Peggy's face crumpled, but Darnell wasn't finished. "Elijah," he said, gesturing toward his son, "is a straight-A student, a star athlete, and more importantly, a young man who deserves the same respect as anyone else in this neighborhood." Elijah, standing beside his father, finally spoke. His voice was calm but carried a quiet strength. "You don't have to like me, Mrs. Simmons," he said, locking eyes with her, "but you will respect me." The crowd erupted in applause, the moment captured on countless phones. Within hours, the video would begin to go viral, sparking a wave of outrage and support across social media. Darnell turned back to the officers. "I expect you both to submit a detailed report by the end of the day. Dismissed." As the officers retreated, heads bowed, Darnell placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Let's head inside, son. This conversation isn't over. Not for this neighborhood, and not for this community." The fallout was swift and unforgiving. By midday, the video of Peggy's confrontation with Chief James and Elijah had circulated widely, appearing on local news and social media platforms. The clip, titled "Neighborhood Karen Gets Shut Down by Police Chief Dad," was met with outrage, sympathy, and calls for accountability. Peggy became a pariah almost overnight. Once a prominent figure in the neighborhood's HOA, she found herself ostracized. Her once friendly neighbors now avoided her, and her pristine yard, once a source of pride, became a symbol of her isolation. At the same time, the James family was inundated with messages of support. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out to praise Elijah's composure and Chief James's leadership. Recognizing the need for a larger conversation, Darnell organized a community meeting at the local recreation center. Flyers were distributed, and the event quickly gained traction, drawing residents, local leaders, and even representatives from the police department. The evening of the meeting, the recreation center was packed. People of all ages and backgrounds filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity, concern, and determination. Darnell stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding yet approachable. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "What happened in my driveway shouldn't have happened, not to my son, not to anyone. But this incident isn't just about Elijah. It's about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, and the steps we need to take to move forward as a community." Elijah stepped forward, his hands slightly trembling, but his voice steady. "I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "I want us to learn from this. I want us to be better." The room erupted in applause, the audience moved by his maturity and courage. Peggy sat near the back, her arms crossed defensively. As the meeting progressed, she shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the discussion pressing heavily on her. Finally, as the session opened for public comments, she stood, her face pale but resolute. "I'd like to speak," she said, her voice shaky but audible. The room fell silent as she stepped forward. I made a mistake," she began, her gaze focused on the floor. "I let my prejudices get the better of me, and I hurt people because of it. I'm sorry, truly." While some in the crowd murmured their approval, others remained skeptical, their arms crossed tightly. Darnell nodded, his expression neutral. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step, Peggy. But words aren't enough. What will you do to make things right? Peggy hesitated, tears brimming in her eyes. I don't know yet, but I'm willing to try. The meeting ended on a note of cautious optimism. While not everyone was convinced of Peggy's sincerity, her gesture sparked meaningful conversations among the attendees. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood underwent subtle but significant changes. Neighbors who had rarely spoken to one another began to connect, sharing stories and experiences that bridged their differences. Elijah's story became a rallying point, inspiring discussions about implicit bias and the importance of community. Peggy, unable to shake the stigma of her actions, eventually put her house up for sale. As for Elijah, he continued to thrive, earning a scholarship to a prestigious basketball camp and setting his sights on a bright future. One crisp autumn evening, Elijah and Darnell stood in their driveway, the basketball hoop illuminated by the golden glow of the setting sun. "Ready for that rematch, old man?" Elijah teased, spinning the ball on his finger. Darnell chuckled, loosening his tie. "Bring it on, kid." As the game began, their laughter echoed through the neighborhood, a poignant reminder of resilience, growth, and the power of family. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of reflection, growth, and change. Elijah's story reminds us that even in moments of adversity, courage and integrity can shine through. It's about standing tall in the face of prejudice and using those moments as catalysts for meaningful conversations and progress. If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts. We love hearing from you. And let us know where you're listening from. Your voices make this community even stronger. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an inspiring story from Hopeful Horizon. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay strong, and always stand up for what's right.